You are watching Lesson 5 for beginning students, The Dance of the Eye and the Hand. Today we will look at the structure of a basic pine tree and learn how to paint pine needles. Pine tree is a Chinese symbol of longevity, of aging well in place, of surviving adversity, of a life well lived. Pine tree can take many different forms in its shape, in its treatment of its needles, in the complexity of its structure. Take a moment and compare these two pine trees. How are the trunks similar? How are they different? How is the treatment of the needles similar? How is it different? What other similarities or differences can you see in these two examples? A pine tree can be simply created with just using your ink. Even in the one tone of black, you can create a dynamic painting. Or you can add color. Use color for the trunk, adding layers of tint, and color in the needles. Still working the needles in the trunk in the ink, but adding washes of various colors to add more elegance to the painting. Either way has its own beauty. So we'll start, as we've done before, by prepping our brush. This is a dry brush. I'll put it in my water and use my mixing dish to begin to get my hairs all in a row, get them parallel, and I'll pick up a little bit of ink. And again, long strokes, length of the hairs. Don't want to get all the way up, but pretty close to it. I can then use the dish to wipe off some of the excess and use my test sheet to test it. And I'm just going to take a little bit of that moisture out. It's a little bit too shiny. Just dabbing on the tissue, going back to my mixing dish and reworking the ink that's in there. And if my excess ink has gathered in the bottom, I would stay out of that. I'd go back to your source ink to get more, because this is probably mixed with water and would just by taking that up make your brush wetter than you want it to be. And I'm kind of twirling this as I go, turning the brush and well mixing it. So as when we studied trees, we started with the first branching from the trunk. So we'll do the same thing in painting pine tree, looking up the trunk and seeing where does that first branch come out, and that is right here. So I'll start with that branching and pull down my trunk. And again, we're doing tree, and we're actually doing pine tree. We want this to be, it's a symbol of longevity in the Chinese culture, so it's a tree that has been there for a long, long time, has struggled and survived and gotten through the elements. So we want a stroke that has that kind of strength to it. So I bring down my trunk, and I can do it in sections. Get a little more ink here. And then the other side of the trunk. So I want to do that first branching and then both sides of the trunk. Then I can add a couple of roots just with these sort of half circle shapes. And then continue with my first branching, finish that branch, and then I move farther up the tree until I get to another branching. And again, I paint that branch, that V first, and then come out from the trunk. Build this other side and then continue upward. A little bit of a curve, a little more of a curve here. And then this long branch that swoops down a bit and So it has a certain cragginess to it. And then this last branch on top. And there's the entire structure of my tree. Once I've built the whole structure, I'll look for some opportunities to put in knotholes. And knotholes are like beauty marks on a pine tree. They show, again, that strength and survival in difficult times. So I've done my outline. I've done my knotholes. Now I'm going to do the scales, or what we would call the bark. And these are these sort of horseshoe shape marks that work their way up the tree. And you want to avoid, as we've done in doing dots, anything that looks like a pattern. But this adds a little texture to my tree and some depth as well, some dimension. Going out the branches, they go sort of sideways, continue to go up, and then out the branches again. And this doesn't take much ink. It's probably best to be a little bit on the drier side. So I have my structure, my knotholes, my scales, or my bark. Then I'm going to shift here a moment and do the needles for you. And I'm going to do them extra large so you can see how they are structured. So I would start in the middle and then go down one side, doesn't matter whether it's left or right, and the other side. And that is one group of needles. Then if I do another one, and again, I'm just holding my brush in a calligraphy stroke, coming down. It's a second group. Then between them, indented a little bit, I add a third, and the third one knits them together. So if you look at the model and you see the groups of bunches of needles, that's taking 1, 2, knitted together. Now, common errors are looking at these and thinking you're seeing curved strokes. And if you do curved strokes, it'll be weak. The pine needle has like a wire in the middle of it. It's a straight, strong line. And so we need to make it with straight, strong lines. Another error is to do them like they were pruned. This is more of the crew cut look. And other common error is to do them like a half-opened fan. And if you do a second one, and then your third one, they're barely knit together. You need to continue to come down till they're almost horizontal so you get that interlocking, that knitting together. So let's see how that looks on the page. I'm going to reset my brush. I don't need a lot of ink in here, but I do want to keep a good point. Have it well mixed. And I'll start here and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's one group. 2 groups, and then the third one sits between them. And again, I'm doing enough so that they're almost, the last stroke is almost horizontal and they knit together. And as I'm painting, I'm just twirling my brush a little bit so I can continue to keep using the existing ink that's in there. There's more than enough probably to do this entire tree. So again, center, down to right, down to left, do one that connects them together. Now, painting a pine tree is like doing dots in that it is somewhat methodical and often hypnotic, and you can get lost in it, which, though may be a pleasant experience, we want to try and stay with each and every stroke and put just a bit of energy into each one and not have it get to be too methodical, but more of intention. Put another one here. Then I'll move up, starting here, right side, left side, second bunch, and then one in between to knit it together. Another common error in making needles is making them too small. And so think of them as having some length. The problem with them being too small is you're going to have to do twice as many of them. And so let's make them big, and you can do fewer and move through this exercise with efficiency. And I'll move over here. Another thing to note is I'm not putting these needles over my trunk or branches. They're sitting on top of it. And the reason for that is when I'm done with this painting, I want the viewer to be able to get close and see all of my brushwork. So I'm not hiding it, I'm using it as part of the composition. And these sit on top. They also pretty much keep an upright orientation. They can move a little bit, but they're not, say, on the underside, upside down or sideways, but they pretty much stay in a horizontal orientation. And continue. A little more ink. And I need my brush straight. I'm losing my point, so don't lose your point. If you lose your point, this all becomes pointless. Sorry about that. And the last branch. Then, once I have the tree populated, I just want to give it a quick look and see, is the outline something that's pleasing? Do I need to add a little more in a couple of places just to fill in or accentuate or reshape some of it? This feels like too much of a big space, so I'm going to put another one over there and maybe just a small one right here. I want to keep some opening in these spaces so that the energy does move and doesn't get blocked off. Last thing we're going to do are add some dots. I'll pick up a little more ink and I'm sort of flattening my brush. Now I don't have a point. I want it a little bit flat. And dots are a hard thing to describe, but they're basically little points, little balls that can add some energy to the piece. They can also, if I have a place where my line might be a bit weak, I can use them to support that line. I can also use them to add some detail to the ground. So maybe these are rocks or moss nearby, and I can do groups of them as well as individuals. So that's our introduction to pine tree. Remembering we start with looking for that first V, drawing that branch, completing the trunk totally, its roots, then continuing to build the structure, always starting with those V's, and then adding knotholes and our scales, and then finally adding our needles. The needles we do one group, two group, knit together with a third. We keep the line straight, and we want the last needles drawn to be these horizontals. It doesn't matter whether you start from the outside in or inside out. I would just lean towards whatever one you need to use to get the strongest stroke you can. Okay, let's give that a try. Before you go, one last note. The handouts for the Dance of the Eye and the Hand for beginning students and continuing students, all lessons, are posted as downloadable PDFs at www.laughingwatersstudio.com. Have a good day. You have been watching Distance Learning from Laughing Waters Studio.